Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, another brief adventure from the autobiography of Cellini about that time he shot the Prince of Orange in the face. Once again, we see that Cellini is braver and smarter than pretty much everyone else, including you. He'd like to make that point very clear. I'd also like to note that if he had succeeded in the plan concocted here, the leadership of the House of Orange would have moved Protestant far faster than it actually did. At this stage, the Prince of Orange was Catholic in service of Spain. But had Cellini managed to murder him, his eventual successor would have risen to the top and changed the dynamic of Northern Europe's politics rather more rapidly. Thanks to the LibriVox recorder, it's Sabella Denton this time, and to all of her production team.
I shall skip over some intervening circumstances, and tell how Pope Clement, wishing to save the tiaras and the whole collection of the great jewels of the Apostolic Camera, had me called, and the Cavalierino in a room alone. This Cavalierino had been a groom in the stable of Filippo Strozzi. He was French, and a person of the lowest birth, but being a most faithful servant, the Pope had made him very rich, and confided in him like himself. So the Pope, the Cavaliere, and I, being shut up together, they laid before me the tiaras and jewels of the regalia, and his Holiness ordered me to take all the gems out of their gold settings. This I accordingly did. Afterwards I wrapped them separately up in bits of paper, and we sewed them into the linings of the Pope's and the Cavaliere's clothes. Then they gave me all the gold, which weighed about 200 pounds, and bade me melt it down as secretly as I was able. I went up to the Angel, where I had my lodging, and could lock the door so as to be free from interruption. There I built a little draught furnace of bricks, with a largish pot, shaped like an open dish, at the bottom of it, and throwing the gold upon the coals, it gradually sank through and dropped into the pan. While the furnace was working, I never left off watching how to annoy our enemies, and as their trenches were less than a stone's throw right below us, I was able to inflict considerable damage on them with some useless missiles, of which there were several piles, forming the old munition of the castle. I chose a swivel and a falconet, which were both a little damaged in the muzzle, and filled them with the projectiles I have mentioned. When I fired my guns, they hurtled down like mad, occasioning all sorts of unexpected mischief in the trenches. Accordingly I kept those pieces always going at the same time that the gold was being melted down, and a little before vespers I noticed some one coming along the margin of the trench on muleback. The mule was trotting very quickly, and the man was talking to the soldiers in the trenches. I took the precaution of discharging my artillery just before he came to the immediate opposite, and so, making a good calculation, I hit my mark. One of the fragments struck him in the face, the rest were scattered on the mule, which fell dead. A tremendous uproar rose from the trench. I opened fire with my other piece, doing them a great hurt. The man turned out to be the Prince of Orange, who was carried through the trenches to a certain tavern in the neighbourhood, whither in a short while all the chief folk of the army came together. When Pope Clement heard what I had done, he sent at once to call for me, and inquired into the circumstances. I related the whole, and added that the man must have been of the greatest consequence, because the inn to which they carried him had been immediately filled by all the chiefs of the army, so far at least as I could judge. The Pope, with a shrewd instinct, sent for Messer Antonio Santacroce, the nobleman who, as I have said, was chief and commander of the gunners. He bade him order all us bombardiers to point our pieces, which were very numerous, in one mass upon the house, and to discharge them all together upon the signal of an arquebuse being fired. He judged that if we killed the generals, the army, which was already almost on the point of breaking up, would take flight. God perhaps had heard the prayers they kept continually making, and meant to rid them in this manner of these impious scoundrels. We put our cannon in order at the command of Santa Croce, and waited for the signal. But when Cardinal Orsini became aware of what was going forward, he began to expostulate with the Pope, protesting that the thing by no means ought to happen, seeing they were on the point of concluding an accommodation, and that if the generals were killed, the rabble of the troops without a leader would storm the castle and complete their utter ruin. Consequently they could by no means allow the Pope's plan to be carried out. The poor Pope, in despair, seeing himself assassinated both inside the castle and without, said that he left them to arrange it. On this our orders were countermanded, But I, who chafed against the leash, when I knew that they were coming round to bid me stop from firing, let blaze one of my demi cannons, and struck a pillar in the courtyard of the house, around which I saw a crowd of people clustering. This shot did such damage to the enemy that it was like to have made them evacuate the house. Cardinal Orsini was absolutely for having me hanged or put to death, but the Pope took up my cause with spirit. The high words that passed between them, though I well know what they are, I will not here relate, because I make no profession of writing history. It is enough for me to occupy myself with my own affairs.
Your saga may vary.